Hello there, welcome to another set of shows. You probably notice I'm now actually doing some backgrounds. Hopefully this looks pretty good. I'm still adjusting as I go, but I'm getting better. The first film I'm going to talk about is Ikarie 1B, which is a Eastern European film from the 60s under Soviet rule, so there was a lot of constraints. They couldn't be critical of the USSR. So this is a great period for film, terrible period for people, but a lot of people made really interesting films within this terrible fascist regime of the communist USSR. I mean, it was a terrible place to be, but because people had to subvert what they were doing and try and sneak things through, criticisms through, they were really inventive. Created really inventive films that I absolutely adore. It's just this great atmosphere that just comes through the films that is based upon a very difficult time. Now, in the the Ikarie was being released in second run. Very nice print. You get a nice little appreciation of Kim Newman in it. So that's how I saw it. It was very hard to find. I mean, it was sold to Roger Corman in the 60s and he made a different film out of it. They changed certain things, added scenes and stuff. Obviously, the way Roger Corman does. For the marketplace of America, like have a happy ending and all the rest of it, or make it much more optimistic. And when in fact this was a dour film, a Russian film. Russians don't make happy films, especially that time. They were living under a fascist regime that monitored everything that you do, and if they did anything wrong, they sent you to death camps. I mean, that was what communist Russia was. I mean, people are very kind of, nostalgic towards the idea of communism at the moment for some reason. And communism was horrible. You didn't want it. I mean, it just took away your abilities to actually do things. You had to be really careful about what you're doing. So, I mean, it's not what people thought it was. But it created something to fight against. The same way in the 80s in Britain, you had all those anti-Thatcher movies that were really interesting. Or in America, you had a lot of anti-Reagan movies. Sometimes when you're working under people who are horrible, you get some really interesting art. The film was based on a book by Stanislaw Lem, and it was made by a director who wasn't one of the big directors. And it was made during the time that people were making these Soviet films that... Because at this point the Soviets were actually ahead in space race for the brief 5 minutes that they were ahead. They were doing their version of what Russia would be like if they went out, and what would communism be like if it worked the way people had hoped it would work. The idea of all these people from different backgrounds cooperating and being civilized to each other and not being brutal, and it was it's kind of almost as utopian as Star Trek in some ways, where Star Trek's almost like the utopian version of America, where people learn to come together and not be greedy and things. This is like the Soviet version of what of our idea got through the hurdles and actually became something good. It didn't work in either case. But it was an idealist thing. But of course, because it's a Russian film, it's much more depressing, because Russians... They love their depression. They're really into their depression. They just love that atmosphere. I mean, have you seen any of the Tarkovsky sci-fi movies like Solaris or Stalker? A good dose of depression never did you any harm, is their point of view, it seems. Now, I kind of adore the Russian sci-fi stuff. I just think the sci-fi stuff in Russia is wonderful and weird and odd and just very strange. There is a kind of tone to it that's different. I mean, American sci-fi at the time had an adventure feel until 2001 kind of gave it a more weight to it. Before that, it was kind of a boys' own adventure. So you'd get things like, even like something like Forbidden Planet, which had deep themes, or Think from Another World, which had some really nice stuff in it. It still had an adventure feel to it. It still was like expanding from what the Westerns were doing, which were adventure stories too, and creating this other thing in sci-fi using science. So them and all these monster movies did have an adventure feel. Every so often you get one like The Day the Earth Stood Still, which was less adventurous, it still had a kind of manhunt feel to it. This change. This was the Russian one was much more expressionistic and existential, and it was all about what happens when you actually go out to the world. And it was something that would definitely influence people like Stanley Kubrick. This kind of film would influence Kubrick, which 2001 had the same kind of feeling of how slow space is. Although Kubrick actually had less incidents in this. This one actually, the Russian one's actually more full of incidents than the actual 2001 is. You'd also have something like Dark Star, which to existential film, but added comedy to it. So it was this kind of little subgenre of filmmaking that actually would come from here to Dark Star, really. And then go back into the 70s sci-fi movies from the early 70s, which were like much more like Charlton Heston, post-Planet of the Apes type movies, where there was a social theme, but there was still an adventure going on until Star Wars changed everything into being much more adventure again. But this was kind of this weird template of something that went on for a bit, then stopped. That's really what happened. And so the story itself, finally got to the story, is this. We start with this thing, this shit that seems doomed, that something's going wrong, and then you go back in time and find out what's happening. It turns out they're on a mission. It's a multinational crew, but they all speak Russian. Just like every American film, they all speak American. And they're going to Alpha Centauri on a mission with a ship, and the ship is the best of the best scientists, and they've all got their issues. They're all kind of their own little slight madnesses. There's some older people and the younger people. You have the older scientists and astronauts who are meant to be the leaders and the wiser ones, the younger ones who are the ones that will develop as they go and who are a lot more enthusiastic. And it's just a slow process of what happens to people in space and how do they react in space. What happens to them when they go into space, and what does space do to them? Because space in this is shown kind of like what Blake's been exploring any area way. You've never been there before. You don't know any rules. You don't know any dangers. So you're a kind of guinea pig. You're the Canadian coal mine. You could easily die a horrible way because no one's done this before. Everyone kind of thinks they know what the precautions are, but they don't really. They know what the known precautions are. They don't know what the unknown precautions are. And that's what the problems are for them, is how do you deal with madness in space? How do you deal with the craziness of space and what's going on in space? What space does to you? And space is a wonderfully crazy thing that no one's been ready for. So what you get is the kind of the existential adventures in space, really. That's what you're kind of getting from this film. So as they go, you see them trying to interact with each other and realise a lot of them are actually quite depressed and they've lost the sense of there's anything to discover in the world. There's a feeling of the world has become what it's become. There's nothing new to discover. There's nothing there to bring life back to them. That can be seen as a criticism of the Soviet system of, we know what everything is, we're scientific based, we're for equality and all the rest of it, but we're stifled imagination. That could be seen as a criticism. Or it's just a case of what human nature's like. And human nature in the Eastern Bloc did seem to go towards depression. Really, it did. It just seemed like it was older cultures who expected the worst for their fellow humans. And this is what this group is. You get a lot of a young lot, but you get these older characters who are dealing with more flaws in humanity and are dealing with the fact that even their loved ones can do things that they don't like, and everything's very compromised. And people bring along stuff to the mission to keep themselves sane, because it's like 15 years it takes. Of course, the speed of light means it goes different from people back home and does for them. For them, this will take months, if not years, but for people back home, it takes 15 years. So it's a different time. So the people who leave back home, when they get back, these people have aged quite a lot, especially young loved ones, because that's what will affect them, and that's what brought up. So some people are couples who go there, and some people are learning to become couples to go. And they'll take along stuff, like someone takes along a robot that actually they built, and everyone thinks it's stupid because it's a retro thing from the last generation, but he enjoys it, so it actually helps him. Some people to play piano, two young people fall in love, there's birthday parties and stuff, and people just try and get over the hump of missing people they love and try to go and do this mission for the good of mankind and dealing with the consequences of choosing to do the mission. So it's a wonderful mood piece, but then at some point it realises, but halfway through, you can't just get by in mood forever. You need a plot sometimes, and you do run into things that create problems. They find something in space, this old spaceship, which turns out was from America, which had all these nuclear weapons on it and things. It's criticism of America and its attitude of have bombs, be expansive, but don't care about the consequences. It's a total denunciation of America. You know, I think if they did that, they could actually put in a satire about communist Russia at the same time. And all those comments. But it's kind of a suggestion of mankind kind of split two different ways in the past before it got together. And everything's kind of flawed and everything's kind of dangerous. And the Americans have these nuclear bombs which cause an explosion because the crew went mad, and there was just these weapons around which caused havoc. So there's that adventure where someone dies and it's a problem. Then, by sorting the issues from that adventure, like the side effects of that, they have to go out to space and sort something. And when out in space, they get affected by something which spreads through the crew, which causes madness for the crew, and they're trying to work out what's going on. It causes lethargy. It causes this feeling of, it's like the most extreme version of their own madness, their own existential madness. And it's like all their worst instincts are becoming flesh, basically, to them. It's becoming something that's going to be real, with something that they have to deal with. And there's some people actually literally going mad and actually causing havoc for the ship because their existential madness has become a real problem for everybody. So that becomes an issue that has to be dealt with. And what they actually realise is they're passing through a space, place of an old dark star that actually causes this, and what they have to do is actually get through it. And that's the issue, is you just have to get through it. Once you get beyond a certain point, you'll get to a tunnel where it doesn't affect you anymore. And one of the great things is what created the tunnel doesn't affect them anymore leads to a more uplifting conclusion where they actually find, spoilers, life, which is what they're looking for, and it becomes this optimistic thing, going through hell to find life. I'm only bringing up a spoiler because it doesn't really matter, but it does. It matters to the crew, but none of these things plots are really... It's a Russian film where the plot and the story are these incidents that happen, but it's all about the mood, it's all about the atmosphere. And it's the atmosphere of the mood going from optimistic but weathered to pessimistic and back up to optimism. So that's why I kind of had to mention what the ending was. It was kind of, there was a kind of a mood. It's almost like an orchestral score of a movie. And the stuff that Roger Corman added was just them going down to the planet at the end and finding stuff, which they don't do here. They do more 2001 things, leave it up to your imagination. Something beautiful happened, just enjoy it. And it is like a beautiful film because of that. And that's another reason why I want to mention it. The fact is, I've made it sound really doom and gloomy, but it's like there's a point to doom and gloom and there's a point to where it's going. So the film is beautiful. The film is beautiful because it has even though you get model shots that don't look great anymore because they're done in the 60s and they're still working technology out. I mean, model shots never get really good till 2001 when you actually worked out how to shoot them properly. Until then, those looked a little bit dodgy. And they've got that here. But the sets look very nice, if kind of very futuristic. It does remind me a lot of like 60s Doctor Who with Patrick Troughton. The sets feel very Patrick Troughton or Doctor Who. Like, I think it was made before that either, so I'm sure they just watched this film and stole from it a lot. But it has that feeling to it. But it doesn't matter, it's just the mood really works. And it gets across the idea of what this world is and what this society is. It's a society where people have to try and get out of their own way, have to get beyond their flaws, have to get beyond their darkness that's in their society. They have to find a way through that and find a way to have some hope and have something beyond what their society has sort of stalled into. And the idea is this is a really good representation of what happens to a stalled society. Like when it loses its faith in finding something new, and this film is almost like the rebirth of it, and how it has to go through madness and through danger and through looking at their own past and the past of the society to get to the next stage, which isn't the next stage like the Star Child from Week 2001. It's much more of a we're found aliens and we have to try and work out what do we do with this now. What does this mean to us? And that's what's beautiful about it. It doesn't answer every question. It just suggests this world, really, this world that has caused itself some problems, and it's now trying to expand its way out of the problems. And it painfully gets through those problems and actually finds something new. But it doesn't mean like they won't infect aliens and cause them the same apathy. I mean, it doesn't mean that they've solved all the problems. It just means they've found something new that may actually jiggle them out of their apathy and create something that's different for them. And that's what's beautiful about it. The weird thing, because of Russia lived under Soviet rule, the optimism was hard to find, but when you actually found it, it just shone through a lot more than would in a Western film, because they were living under awful circumstances. You know, and that's what's great about the film. The film is beautiful when it can be beautiful at the end, but also it's quite scary when you see how far they're falling into madness at a certain point. There is a sense of they do cover the society at its worst so well that when you get to the best, it really becomes beautiful. So this is a wonderful film. I would definitely recommend you try and watch it. It is readily available now for the first time in years, and it is worth your money. It's worth your time. It is a beautiful film. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll be back with some more. I hope you enjoy the backgrounds and what I'm doing with them, because I'm trying some new stuff. Okay, right, bye for now.